Good afternoon. Before we get started today, some quick housekeeping. Today is Giving Tuesday, and we want to invite you to partner with the Think Institute prayerfully and financially. You know, our organization, my wife and I, as you probably know, are missionaries, and our organization has no central fund for paying missionaries or mission staff. And so we rely on the like-minded individuals and churches who partner with us financially and prayerfully. So if you believe in the Think Institute and the work that we are doing, you can sign up and partner with us very simply by going to give.crew.org/1018841. We would greatly appreciate either monthly partnerships, or you can contribute a one-time gift. But again, we greatly appreciate it, and we do rely on like-minded individuals and churches for our support. So now let's get into the show. Did you hear the news? Pureflix has now been bought out by Sony. And with that news, people are talking about Christian movies and entertainment. And when that happens, certain questions rise to the surface. What kind of entertainment should Christians enjoy? Why do so many Christian movies seem like cheap knockoffs of secular films? Is it possible for the church to regain the artistic excellence of bygone eras? And who is going to make it happen? Welcome to the Think Institute with Joel Sedekase. I'm Joel Sedekase, and today's impossible question is, what should be the Christian's approach to movies and entertainment? And to help us answer that question and more is Marcus Pittman. Marcus is the filmmaker and showrunner known for films like Babies Are Murdered Here, Babies Are Still Murdered Here, and one of my personal favorites, How to Answer the Fool. He's also the chief creative officer and co-founder of LOOR.tv. And he joins me today to talk about culture, entertainment, and whether we are really ready for a new standard in Christian movies and entertainment. Marcus Pittman, welcome to the Think Institute podcast.
Thank you for having me, man.
Hey, it is my pleasure. I've been really looking forward to this conversation and, just finding out more about LOOR and having this discussion with you because, man, you're starting something that is, I think, very needed. I know that you believe that it's needed. And I think that there's a lot of people who feel very like-mindedly about this. So can you give us like an introduction to LOOR? We're going to get in depth with it, but tell us about this new streaming service, and then let's expand out into a broader conversation about arts and Christian movies and entertainment. But what's up with LOOR?
Yeah, so essentially we're trying to create a streaming service with Christian movies that don't suck. That's pretty much our tagline, because I think Christian entertainment is so bad. It's always been that way. The easiest way to describe why LOOR is needed is to kind of go through the history of Christian entertainment. So if I know you were at the Fight Laugh Feast conference, and that was located in Franklin, Tennessee. In Nashville is, the Country Music Hall of Fame. That's where country music got its start. Well, what happened was country music and Christian music sort of came up together as sort of one and the same thing. And what they realized was, well, if we're going to sing about bars and women and alcohol, we can't have the Christian audience around for that. We need to sort of segment the two audiences. And so what they did was they essentially created the Christian music industry and moved them 30 miles south to Franklin, Tennessee. And that's where you get your K-Love, and that's where you get everything else.
Okay.
Well, what disrupted that was the Christian hip hop scene and the internet. So when you had Lecrae and even before that with Cross Movement and those sort of Christian hip hop organizations.
Love Cross Movement.
Yeah, they sort of upset that industry because everyone's calling into K-Love and they're like, hey, can you play Lecrae? And they're like, yeah, that's not Christian music. That's not how it sounds or feels. That's not that's not the genre we placed Christian music in.
Right.
And so it created sort of like this problem. And so what Caleb did in response was they created Air One, the radio stations where that Christian music can be on Air One, and then a different kind of Christian music can be on like Caleb, and like keep the same sound. But everything about Christian music or Christian entertainment is structured and defined and placed into this genre where it looks and feels and sounds the same. Right? So you're listening to Christian music by the chords they use, the type of words that they say, and how it sounds. You all know that because it's been programmed to be that way for you,
Right.
and to keep out of the secular music industry, and to kind of keep the profit separated. Right.
Yeah.
And so the same thing happened with, let's say, Passion of the Christ. Passion of the Christ got $600 million on a $30 million budget, which is absolutely tremendous. Especially if you look at like a Marvel film costs $250 million and it brings in maybe 500 million, maybe $1 billion worldwide. And so then they have to split half of that with the movie theaters. And so, they walk away pretty much breaking even on the Marvel films. So you would think as an investor, you would go, well, I want to invest in the $30 million films that make 600 million.
Right.
But the reason nobody does that is because when Passion of the Christ came out, they realized that was a huge threat. And so they decided to slander Mel Gibson, and they made Mel Gibson's life complete hell. And so pretty much everybody was like, oh yeah, well maybe we don't want to do the Christian film thing, no matter how profitable it was. So that's how they sort of kept, they sort of made an example out of Mel Gibson and was like, yeah, don't do that.
Was that ideologically driven? I mean, profits are profits, right? Cash is king.
Yeah, you would think, but you would think that, right? But then when you had the George Floyd thing come out this year, Live PD got canceled off of A&E, and Live PD was the #1 most profitable, most viewed show on all of television.
Wow.
So religion always comes before profit, right? So your religion is always going to come before profit. The problem for us,
just to flesh that out, then this is this is an irreligious, religious, ideological movement that's driving.
Everything is religious, and every religious, everybody's religious. Right. So those decisions are always driven by some sort of religion. So all business decisions are influenced by a religion. Whether you make a cake or don't make a cake for a homosexual, all those sort of things. Those are all religious decisions. Right. You have to make to run your business. Chick-fil-A is a great example of religion making a great company. At least it was. And then right. So those are the sort of things. But yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, this is why someone like Chris Pratt, who's one of the top celebrities, could be canceled. There'd be a call to cancel him so quickly, no matter how much money he makes in the box office.
Right.
So
it's
all
insanity.
Those sort of things. Yeah. So my thought is essentially, going through all this stuff, it's like, well, if you have an organization that's not afraid of being canceled and actually laughs in its face at cancel culture, then you're only left with as filmmakers, you're only left with your stories to compete in the marketplace. And so my thought is, well, Christian stories are just inherently better stories. And because Christian stories are inherently better, actual Christian stories, not contrived Christian stories that the marketplace thinks are Christian, but actual, I would, when I say that, I'm presuppositional. So when I say a Christian story, I mean, even pagans tell Christian stories. I think The Mandalorian is probably one of the best examples of a Christian story on TV. It's a father protecting his adopted son, right? So, and everybody looks at that and they go, wow, the story is so amazing. They're so creative. But it's not. It's just that a father protecting his son is such a rare story in our culture that we're just blown away by the fact that it even exists, right? It's one of the most pro-life films on television.
Yeah,
and
totally.
So when I say that the Christian films can win in the marketplace, it's not the evangelistic cheesy altar call Pureflix sort of nonsense that we've seen, but it's actual legitimate stories that are with a Christian worldview. So not necessarily evangelistic films, but just good films. So I think Christians tell the best stories, right? And so if you look at history in the Bible starts out with a storytelling contest, right? So you have God's story, and then you have Satan's story, and it's which one's going to win. And we know that God's story is going to win, but there's all these other stories of Satan trying to tell his story, trying to interfere with the seed of the woman throughout the entire canon of Scripture, and so and then that story never succeeds, even though people are driven astray by those terrible stories. Right. But I think there's a reason, because all humans are created in the image of God, there's a reason why people can watch The Mandalorian and go, that's amazing. And then they watch some of the newer movies where there's like these anti-heroes and they're not really good guys, but they turn out to be good guys. And you're like, well, that's just not as I'm not going to be attached to that story for generations like I am even something like Home Alone, where there's a clear good versus evil, and so so even those sort of things, like there's something you see there in those stories, that there's a reason why they last for generations and they're classics, and it's because they're rooted within a Christian worldview.
Man, that's a good point. And so you're starting your own streaming service.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So here's what you have to solve some problems when you're starting a streaming service. The first is you don't have $1 billion a month to spend on content like Netflix does, right? So that's number one. You don't, and then the other problem is everything you see on television is from about 8 people in the United States. So you have the head of Netflix, you have the head of Disney, you have the head of Viacom, CBS, the head of NBC Universal, right? Main things. So, and then those decisions as to what they air, what they greenlight, what they spend money on are done in a boardroom with essentially 1 or 2 people just finally making that call.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't take a massive amount of people to make good content. Because that's just not how it works. So but the problem is that those people are making decisions based on their worldview for what they believe people want to see.
Is that the case? Is this what they believe people want to see? Or again, being driven by their ideology, is this what they think people ought to see, should see? Because we know how
it's both.
Entertainment shapes your mind as well.
Yeah,
they know that. They have to know.
So do algorithms, right? And so one of the things is, you look at like Netflix's top 10. Right? They're saying this is a top 10 things on Netflix.
Right.
Well, that's just the top 10 things they want you to see on Netflix. That's not necessarily the number one things people are viewing and watching and streaming. So when you look at the front page of Netflix, the algorithm is being fed to you partly based on what you watch or what you have watched, but also based on what Netflix wants you to watch, because they put money into it and whatnot. So there's a ideological position there, which is we have to have a homosexual in every movie.
Right.
And that doesn't matter whether you want to see it or not. I would say that most people see that and go, oh, they're just forcing another homosexual on us. Yeah. But we still watch it anyway, because that's what the algorithms programmed us to watch and whatnot.
We noticed that there was a Christmas movie recently. My wife and I love those cheesy Christmas romances, and just in the background of this grand dance, this ball party that they're having, there's 2 men dancing romantically, and it had nothing to do with the story. Completely contrived, completely just inserted. We saw, and we just we rolled our eyes and we kept watching. Well, what else can you do?
Yeah, yeah. So the problem is when we're trying to figure out, how do we build a platform, the first thing is, well, we have to take the power away from a few people
Mm,
and go back to a biblical worldview of basic economics, and we say, well, it's the consumers that make the decisions, right? Not the creators. So if you look, let's say like Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, uh, lots of great stuff about capitalism in there, but she was wrong on the fact that the John Galts are the ones that move the economy. It's
hmm.
not John Galt that moves the economy, it's the consumers that move the economy.
What role
And
did John
so,
Galt have? Who is he analogous to in
the,
today's world?
well, John Galt would be Zuckerberg, Bezos, Ted Sarandos, Netflix head of
Okay.
Netflix. Like those, so those are the ones that make the decisions for the people.
Okay.
So that's sort of like Ayn Rand's view of capitalism. A lot of the stuff she got is absolutely dead on and right about the free market and the government interfering and all that stuff. The difference is the hero of Atlas Shrugged is not John Galt; it's the consumers.
Hmm.
And so that's a huge difference in sort of the philosophy of capitalism from a biblical framework. Whereas capitalism exists to serve people, whereas Ayn Rand's is capitalism exists to serve uh, the billionaires, right? So those
Okay.
are the differences. Um, so what we need to do is figure out from a biblical economics standpoint how to fix that problem. And so our solution is essentially, well, let's just let the people decide what content they want to make and have a giant storytelling contest on a website where people can donate money to the movies that they want to see. And so
Right
that
on.
immediately takes the content decisions away from us, and then it allows the people to be able to create that sort of content. And so that's sort of the plan. And we're going to have a massive uh, streaming contest. As you can see, it's family funded entertainment. So the idea is just to have we're going to have a bunch of creators that are already making content for us now, and they're going to put their content up there, and may the best story win, as we say.
Wow. So, what's been something that you didn't expect when you entered into this process? Something that maybe caught you off guard, or something that hit you out of the blue. Was there anything like that?
Yeah, the biggest objection was from investors. The biggest objection was, well, how are you going to guarantee that the creators that come on board are good? And so which is a great question.
Yeah, yeah, right.
So the one thing that shocked us is over the past few weeks how many phone calls we've had with incredibly high level creatives in Hollywood at every single level of development, every single level. And so
Really?
I mean, yeah, you have just from camera people to directors to animators to, I mean, everybody. And so that's sort of been the thing that's really shocked us. And so every one of them's in this catch-22 position. It's, I can either stay here and see that I don't have long. I don't, like, they're not going to let me be
Right.
here very long. And even the fact that I've been here is already probably too long as it is. So I can sit down and be quiet and just do my job
At their current companies.
at their current companies. And of course, they don't have any creative freedom, but they've never really had it anyway. It's just not how those organizations work. Or they could go to, let's say, Pureflix, or I guess it's a firm now, a firm entertainment. So
Right.
so they could go there, and so they're sort of stuck in this. Well, I can be a slave to Egypt, or I can be a slave to this sort of evangelical, sort of weird fundamentalist sort of view of filmmaking
Hmm.
that is forcing me to make films in line with what Christian music is, right? Same thing.
Right,
So
right, right.
trying to keep the lines clearly drawn. And so what LOOR hopes to do is to create not an alternative but a true competitor to the places that they're working now. That way, if that happens, and when that happens, there's not going to be you can't have cancel culture if there's somewhere else you can go to that's better.
Yeah.
right? So if the Christians are like, well, we're going to go to LOOR, and they're really talented, there's suddenly going to be a fight that happens within Hollywood. That's like, well, do we let them go, or do we try and keep them? And if we try to keep them, what does that mean? Well, if we try and keep them, it probably means we're gonna have to create content that they want to make, right? And that people want to see. So it's a complete disruption of the entire industry. And we believe that if a Christian artist should be able to love God and make what they want, and like the Augustine quote, right? Love God and do what you want, right? So so we're saying, well, love God, make what you want. Come on, LOOR, make whatever you want. We were talking to a group of professionals, and they're like, well, if we were to come and make stuff for LOOR, what would we do? And we're like, we don't care. You guys are professionals. Make whatever you want. And that's so outside of Hollywood's line of thinking, where it's like, the one guy in the room, and he says, well, this is a script we're going to do. And they hire the people to make the script for them. So we're saying, well, just make your own content, right? So it's complete disruption of the entire industry.
There's a lot of freedom there. You're offering a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
You mentioned something earlier, Marcus. You talked about how religion comes before prophets, and I'm a presuppositionalist as well, and I understand the importance of worldview thinking. What for a Christian who wants to live out his or her biblical worldview, what should be the Christian's approach to movies and entertainment? Because so many of us, like me, I grew up in the 90s listening to, I remember when I started listening to Christian radio, I knew it was hokey. I understood that. I knew that I was I was in 6th grade. I knew I was listening to, the Christian knockoff version of like the Backstreet Boys. And even that was edgy at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
And yes, I loved cross movement, but that stuff you had to, you didn't have as much access to that. You had to get the bootleg DVDs. But for Christians who have grown up in the Christian ghetto, and their alternative is either, Pureflix or the one that you rail on all the time, Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
What should be our approach in judging which movies, let alone what we should be making, but what we should be taking in? How, if we're not just going to cast the whole thing off and say all movies are from the devil, how do we delineate and judge what kind of content we're going to be taking in?
Yeah. So, I mean, one is obviously like pornography is definitely not something you should take in.
Right.
Period. That's period. There's sin involved in making pornography, like the nude scenes and Game of Thrones, those sort of things. There's sin, like there's people. I mean, you should never look at a naked person that's not your spouse, right? So any sort of filmmaking method that requires that sort of violation of the bedroom is automatically a sin. However, there are ways to portray evil in which sin is not done in order to make evil, right? So it's like the Cuties thing. It's like Cuties is about sexual exploitation of children, but they sexually exploited children. Right. So same with the Game of Thrones and all those things, right? You can say, well, it's actually, the nudity is a bad part of the show. It's like, well, yeah, I get that, but they use nudity to do it.
Right.
So the purpose is not the same. But when it comes to like violence and like it doesn't, you don't have to really kill somebody to show a murder on TV.
Right.
There's fake blood. There's all these sort of things. And we can portray sin in a fake way, in which no sin takes place, and so I think we see that in the way in which we get the scriptures. The scriptures are very clear and vivid about sin and the wickedness of sin, and the Bible talks about all these sort of things, the wickedness of man, but not in a way that is sinful. Right. However, if you were to look at the Christian film industry, the Bible would be too controversial for them.
Absolutely.
Especially if you look at like Ezekiel and those sort of passages, that would never make it, not even read in a Christian film, not alone reenacted.
Right.
So So what we want to do is we want to say, well, what happens if you take all those sort of limits off and you just say make a good story? And you know, there's always going to be the question of, well, you know, should I watch an R-rated Christian film with my kids? And the answer is probably, well, no, you shouldn't.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean no Christian can watch it. So like, you know, there's, you know, when you say something is family friendly, it's like, well, what family? What about, you know, an older couple without kids, or a couple with teenagers, right? So those are all different kinds of family that you get. And you see this with HBO. HBO has their programming, but then they have Sesame Street and Elmo. They just bought licensing rights too. So they know that when HBO says they're a family streaming service, they're not saying everything is for every member of the family,
right?
Like Christian entertainment does. And so that's sort of, we sort of believe that as well.
Is there a difference?
The best filter, I just want to say this, the best filter is the father.
Amen.
Right. Yeah. When you're talking about how do I filter what my kids watch, it's like, well, that's what the father is for.
Right.
And sometimes the father just has to watch stuff twice, once by himself and once with the kid.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Man, and I still remember, I do this for my kids. I still remember when I was a kid, you know, I was into comic books, and my dad would always, before I could get a comic book, he would thumb through the whole thing, you know, check it out, make sure that there was nothing objectionable he didn't want his 9-10-year-old son to see. And then he would pass it off to me. And there would be times when he'd say no, and there'd be times when he said yes. And I understood. I'd be frustrated sometimes because, man, I want to see, you know, I want to see what happens here. But I understood, you know, that was my dad's job, and he was. I do the same thing for my own kids. But Marcus, is there a difference? Now, this is kind of a side question, but you know, in Scripture, God gives us literary depictions of things. So it'll say, you know, you've got Ehud, who stabs the king Eglon, and his guts spill out, and he stinks up the upper, you know, chambers there, and then Ehud hightails it out of Dodge. Okay, it's one thing to read the story and to have the story in my mind playing out like a movie. It would be another thing, and I'm not saying right or wrong, I'm asking your thoughts on this. It would be another thing to make a film about Ehud where you see him plunge the knife in, the guts spill out, and he falls over dead. Now, is there something morally, is there a morally significant change that happens between reading something and the action is in my mind versus watching it played out? In one case, the mind being active; in another case, the mind, in a sense, passively receiving. Have you thought about that? Is that a concern? Is that an issue, or not really?
No, I don't think it's an issue. You know, there's a lot of value to seeing evil as it's meant to be. And if you go back in Bible times, we're so sort of disconnected from it. But even like during the American Revolution and all these sort of things, I mean, men trained to be men, right? And so I mean, David would kill animals with his bare hands and all these sort of, like, that's way worse than watching it, you know, right, in a fictionalized form. Yeah. And so I think we have such a we're so soft on those sort of things.
Yeah, it's a good point.
And that sort of masculinity. But I don't think, you know, I'm not, you know, I was talking to a guy named Colin Gunn. He did I think he was on Apologia TV one time, and he did the Wait Till It's Free documentary on socialized healthcare. It was really good. But he was also a video game designer. So we had him on the show before he did movies. He was making his own video games. And he said that one of the blessings of video games is that it trains men for war without putting them in any real danger.
Okay.
And so the violent video games are actually good in that it's not real, but it can teach.
Yeah.
Without having to place someone, you don't have to actually go into military training to at least get some sort of experience and knowledge of how war works.
Right.
And so there's a benefit and a blessing to that. It also, but at the same time, it also creates lazy men who become obsessed with video games, right? Mm-hmm. And so, but the same is true with television. There's people who are addicted to television, right?
Yeah.
So there's always those sort of consequences, but the medium of communication is not inherently evil.
Okay.
It's what people do with it.
Now that's good. Yeah. Because there used to be, the old fundamentalist trope was, you can't even go to the movies.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And because it was assumed that the media itself.
I think there's some Spurgeon quotes about going to the theater and how awful it was to do that. And
Yeah.
those sort of things just essentially isolated ourselves from the community. One of the things that's important to know is that I think Doug Wilson said this is like, you can't have a culture war without a culture,
Right.
and you can't have culture without stories.
Yeah.
Right. So we've abandoned stories, and now we're saying we're in a culture war. It's like, no, we're not even in a culture war.
Yeah.
So one of the things is all law becomes law because of stories, not statistics. Right. So if you look at even the law that God gave us in the Old Testament is handed down through a story. Right. Moses is he's at Mount Sinai. He comes down and they're worshiping a golden calf, and he smashes the tablets. And then he goes back and he gets more tablets. And then we get in the narrative, we get our law.
Yeah.
Right. So
that's
it's
right.
within the story. Now the liberals understand this really well. Right. That's why there's homosexuals on television. And next thing you know, there's homosexual marriage.
Right.
Right. So, and that's a law. Right. So all these sort of laws that we get are based not on statistics. However, conservatives, we argue statistics. So, for example, a liberal will say, well, imagine someone who's raped and then they have to have an abortion. And then every time they look at their son's face, they see the eyes of the person that raped them. Right.
Yeah.
And then we go, well, that only happens at 1% of abortions.
Yeah.
And right. And they're like, well, it doesn't matter. They just told the story, and the story wins. And the story is what creates rape and incest exceptions when it comes to abortion. Right. And so that's how we get that, is all through story. So when Christians just abandon story, and we abandon entertainment, and we say, well, we don't need to be a part of that, well, then we've given up any chance of having righteous laws.
Yeah, man. Well, that's, in the past, I was watching a talk of yours from 5 years ago where you were talking about the difference between the humanist art of the Renaissance and the Dutch Reformed art of the Reformation. Yeah. And you can see I think it was a Rembrandt you were pointing to, and describing, you can see the story in the creases in the man's face. That was the subject of this painting. And in the talk, you were contrasting that with the idealized version of King David that Michelangelo had created as part of the humanist movement.
Yeah.
And so there was a time in Christian history where we understood that story communicated theology. Rembrandt being Dutch Reformed, you made this point. He was communicating, look, there's a fallenness to man. There's a fallenness to the world, and there's depravity.
The way they viewed man, the nature of man, was portrayed in their art. So, like,
how do we recapture that? Because our stories now are really contrived to communicate a message. They don't have the message weaved into them, but the message, the story itself, is a vehicle to get across a sort of walk the aisle gospel presentation, which I love. Walk the aisle gospel presentations. I'm fine with that, but the whole story shouldn't just feel like a setup so you can get to that moment.
Well, our Christian films are rooted in a theological worldview and framework too. And so, like, the weakness of the church in terms of how it views sin is how our films portray sin. Right. And so the best way to describe this, we were talking about this week. The best way to describe this is Christian films are grape juice when they should be wine.
Oh yeah.
Right. So we're afraid of, I think it was Calvin that said this, but it should be wine because wine is a powerful drink. Like, that's why communion should be based on wine, because it's powerful and dangerous.
Wow.
And that's why we should take communion. So when our communion is grape juice, well, suddenly our movies are grape juice too. And so we've taken all that sort of danger out. Wow. And So the stories that we see from Pureflix or these other sort of organizations are because uh, it's because our theology is weak. And then, you know, when we all the sin presented in Christian films, it's usually marital related or
Yeah.
fatherly related,
Yeah.
but it's essentially the heroes of the film overcome those issues by themselves.
Hmm.
When you watch, like, even Fireproof, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, obviously Christianity is obviously part of it, and salvation is part of it, but it's presented in a way that pretty much anybody can do it if you just got the book from Lifeway,
Hmm.
right? And whereas
Right.
like a true Christian testimony should make it so that uh, the sin that they're trying to overcome is so grave that it's absolute miraculous feat that they survive it.
Wow. Yeah.
And so but we don't see that, so our view of salvation is essentially works righteousness. Just say the prayer and everything will be okay. So
Right.
our films are just like, well, this is the moment they said the prayer, so everything's okay. So there's not a lot of depth because our pulpits don't have a lot of depth. So
And you're hoping, it sounds like, that your content creators at LOOR are going to bring that depth. They're going to operate out of that depth.
yeah, I think they will. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Christians have better stories and they tell
Yeah.
better stories. I mean, you see this. I mean, even like Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis and those sort of things. They're just great stories that you pass
Yeah.
down to your children,
Yeah.
and so it's because of the Christian worldview that's built. Now, there's gonna be junk on LOOR, right? If you open up a platform, there's always gonna be junk, but the power of a platform is not in the junk; it's in the who the platform promotes and
Okay.
positions, right? So YouTube, there's a lot of great content on YouTube, but you'll never see that on the front page. Right? So because the power of the platform is in who the platform features. And so we know that there's going to be oddball weird movies and stuff eventually, long term, not initially,
Yeah.
but if long term, once as the platform opens up or more. But the other thing too is, like, let the pagans come and make films according to our rules. Let them sit at our table, right? If an unbeliever comes and has dinner at your house, they have to follow your rules,
Right.
right? So let them come.
We're
Let them
still going to pray
compete.
before we eat.
Yeah, let them compete in the marketplace, right? Let them compete. Let them see. Maybe they make a great story, but
Wow.
they have to do it in accordance with our rules. And then also, if you build the platform in which your consumer base has an expectation, and a pagan comes in there and just defies that expectation, it's not going to be profitable or rewarding for them,
Well,
right? It's like selling a hamburger at Chick-fil-A. It's just like, what are
yeah.
you doing? I didn't come
Yeah.
here for that.
But
Yeah.
are you now just introducing your own Christian version of cancel culture? Because you
Well,
know
every culture has a blasphemy law.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah. So
So
so I mean,
yeah, I mean that's a
I
good
don't I
point.
don't I don't mind saying. These are the rules.
So
No nudity.
you're putting that
Yeah.
out front, whereas
Yeah.
um am I correct that LOOR got its sort of the spark that ignited LOOR was Babies Are Still Murdered Here being booted off of Netflix? Is that what happened?
It was on Amazon.
Oh,
Yeah. So
Amazon.
we were on Amazon and everything was going pretty well. We had a giant billboard up that was advertising it and everything.
Mhm.
And I started to get these Twitter messages that says, "Hey, I can't watch I can't watch Babies Are Murdered Here on Prime anymore." And I was like, "Why?" And so I went, and it looked like I could still watch it, which is what was really weird. But then I, opened up an incognito browser and logged and, went to the thing, and it said this is no longer available. And then I went in the back end of Amazon, and they're like, based on customer reviews, this is not acceptable. And I'm like, what are you
Wow.
talking about? It had like 500 or like 300 5-star reviews, and everything was positive about it. But what happened was is that Amazon tagged keywords like pro-life and abortion and those sort of things from the reviews, and they were able to determine that it wasn't something that Amazon wanted to stream. So that was sort of like the thing. But I was like, well, Christians can't really make movies on YouTube, and they put a movie out on YouTube, they're going to be demonetized there. So all these,
Right.
and then Netflix is only going to buy a film from you if you have, established agent and you meet their worldview guidelines. So there wasn't really a lot of options. And then Pureflix either didn't want to pay any money for films, or if they did take your film, they would make you do several edits and stuff like that. That just wasn't really worth making those sort of things. And so I was just like, well, there has to be a better option, and that's sort of how LOOR came about. So it did start with that. So it's just like, look, if you guys are going to cancel me, then I'll just build something better.
Yeah. So logistically, you've kind of alluded to it, but specifically, how is it going to work? Is it going to be like a competition between different content creators, or you said let the best story win? How will that process of elimination or promotion, how is that going to work on LOOR?
Yeah, we're keeping those details on the side right now.
Oh, okay.
But I will say that we're creating a completely unique way of making films.
Okay.
So it's a way in which no one's done it before, and so the hope is that it's not, like I said, it's a true competitor and a disruptor, in the same way I think the printing press was, in terms of how it disrupted the entire industry. And so that's sort of a plan, because there's just too much time. I mean, like if you look at Parler or Gab, they're just conservative bubbles where people just are mad at Facebook, and then they just go there and complain about how terrible Facebook is.
Yeah.
But it's not a real competitor. I don't think Parler is going to be something, and I could be wrong, but I don't think Parler is going to be something that competes with something like Facebook. Because I think it's mainly just a clone, right? So you have these clones.
Yeah, it's Twitter for people, for conservatives or people who don't want to get censored, basically.
Yeah. So what you have to do is you have to create new technology that actually changes the way everybody does everything. And so that's sort of the plan with that. And we'll keep those details on the low for our investors. Right now.
Oh yeah. Okay. No, that's good. We don't want somebody going and taking the idea before LOOR launches. And we've got some questions coming in from viewers, Marcus.
Okay.
But really quick, if you could tell me maybe some logistical details, like when is your target date for launching the service? How much is it going to cost? Or maybe you can't tell me that yet. And then 2, what's behind the name?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll talk about the name. The name is, if you look at a film festival, let's say like Sundance Film Festival or the Toronto Film Festival, you'll see that the movies that are featured there receive what are laurels. And it's like an ivy branch, and it says official selection of Sundance Film Festival, and you'll see the ivy. So those are film festival awards.
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially LOOR comes from the prefix laurels.
Okay.
Or my wife's name is Laura, right? So it's all from that sort of gift award sort of thing. So when you're making a platform that's about people giving and donating to see a film, they're giving LOOR. They're giving LOOR. So they're giving those sort of things. So that's where but also it comes from the same sort of line where you get history of the past. It was LOOR, right?
LOOR,
like the
yeah.
LORE in that sense, but it's all from that same prefix of that term. And then it's just spelled differently because that's how you get a 4-letter domain on the internet nowadays.
Okay. So yeah. So I thought LOOR, I mean that kind of made sense. You're telling stories, that made sense. I didn't guess the laurels aspect of it. And I wasn't sure if it was lure, like you're luring people away from Netflix and Amazon.
Yeah, no, it's LOOR. But okay. Whatever. It's all the same root. So
okay. Yeah. Oh, very cool. So so can you tell us any information on when the target date is for it to launch?
Well, right now we're working with content creators, and we're securing some projects, but we do plan to launch relatively soon. at least to some degree, in that people will be able to help build the platform.
Okay.
So that's going to happen probably sooner rather than later, and with that, will become, as things transition and grow. It'll, when you're putting together a website, it's like making a fish, but you start with sushi, right? So
Okay.
you're building it piece at a time,
Huh.
and then eventually it becomes the thing that you want it to. And so that's sort of how it'll work and how it'll function, and the plan to get it out there. And it's gonna be really great. I'm excited to see people get uh, join.
Very cool. From the very small glimpses that you've given in your descriptions, it reminds me a little bit of the old website Channel 101. And I don't know if I'm misreading.
Oh, that's where the Rick and Morty stuff came from, right?
Well, I know that's where like the Lonely Island guys came from. Um,
Yeah.
I
I
don't
heard
know if
about that.
that could be where Rick and Morty came from. I'm not up on Rick and Morty. I only know it from,
Yeah,
tangentially, but
I think that all came from, because there's a lot of animated stuff. Lonely Island guys came from there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, very cool. All right. So we do have some questions that have come in and some comments. Now this viewer on YouTube named Dr. Strange has been, I mean, I think he's probably he's probably got like 30 comments on here. But here's I asked him in the comments as we were talking, I said, do you have like one question that you want Marcus to answer? And basically from what he's shared here, he said he's Muslim, and his question is, I don't know if you can answer this. I don't know if I could. Um, are there any good movies about textual criticism? What do you know about that, Marcus? Anything?
I have no idea, man. That's not my way.
Yeah,
That's I have no idea. I would just refer people to James White.
that's
Answering
that's what I would
questions.
say.
So yeah, I guess Alpha and Omega Ministries is probably where. I mean, there's not movies, but
Right. Right. So there you go. Dr. Strange, go onto YouTube, go check out James White's debates. He's actually debated a number of Muslim apologists, and several of those debates do have to do with textual comparisons between the Bible and the Quran. So happy hunting. And hopefully that answers your question. I'm not aware of any movies like that either. Okay, let's see. Brian Zebarth has just a comment. He says that the new Lord of the Rings is supposed to have nudity. This is said and will draw many to watch it. Man, I hope that's not true. Have you heard anything about that?
yeah, that no, they have said that. So a lot of the casting calls are requesting that the actors and actresses be comfortable with on-screen nudity. So that's sort of they got a lot of fallout about that, though. I'm wondering how committed they are to that. That'll be interesting to see.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, it's like nobody wants to see Hobbit sex.
Oh
Like
man.
nobody wants to see that, and so that's really weird, man. It's it'll be interesting to see, because a lot of, this is the thing, and he says in this comment it'll draw many to watch it, but I don't think that's the case, because what we've
Right.
seen is the phrase in Hollywood that's been get woke, go broke.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of truth to that, because what's happening is you have these people that are pushing these sort of agendas, and I don't think they believe uh, that people don't really want to see it. I think they think everybody wants to see this, because you have like the homosexual lobbies, the trans lobbies that are very loud and outspoken about this
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
And so they imagine that this is just the way the culture is. But if you look at, let's say, Sony, which is, by the way, the same Sony that bought Pureflix,
Yeah.
the PlayStation game, The Last of Us 2, had a major homosexual trans plot point in it. And people really hated it.
Hmm.
And these are gamers that aren't Christians, and they don't really care if you're a homosexual or trans or not, but they don't like the story to sacrifice for agendas, because they're
Right.
video gamers are very passionate about story-driven games, and so
Right.
when they see that, they're just like, "This is ridiculous," and the game flopped. Like, I mean, it had a lot of sales from the first day, but after that, it immediately just dropped, and it
Wow.
has like a 1.6 review.
Really?
So I think it's a big risk for Amazon to put the naked hobbits in their show, because I think that'll backfire on really the core. I mean, these people who are obsessed with Lord of the Rings, they like Lord of the Rings because it's a PG-13, right?
Right.
Like that, and you start making it like adult and like not true to the way the author intended it. That's not going to go well
Right.
for you. But I don't think I think it'll actually backfire if they do it. And so I mean, I know that it could be that in Hollywood, comfortable with nudity is just a generic clause in all casting calls now.
Hmm.
But it doesn't mean that they're going to do it. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. Hopefully, if they are going that direction, they can turn the ship around before it's too late.
yeah.
Um, I think, I think you're right. Now, Dr. Strange asked another question. Again, our Muslim YouTube friend. He says, I'd like to kind of parlay this out into a broader question, but he says, would you ever make a movie about Ezekiel 23:20? Now, in that verse, God is calling out Israel for. So I think I want to preface this a little bit because Dr. Strange, I don't know if this is a snarky point or a good faith question, but in that it could be maybe a little bit of both. But in that passage, you have this graphic detail of let's see, my kids are probably going to listen to this, and we haven't read through Ezekiel with them yet. So uh although we've read through the life of David and there's plenty
Yeah.
of stuff
Yeah.
there, but it's God describing, let's say, private parts and
Hmm.
intercourse in
Hmm.
graphic detail, and
Hmm.
it has a way of shocking you because he's metaphorically describing the spiritual adultery of Israel. And so the
Yeah.
passage is not really about lewd intercourse. It's about something that's actually even far worse, which is spiritual idolatry, which Israel. So that being said, Marcus, maybe we can parlay this into a different question. And feel free to answer the question as it is too. But are there some parts of the Bible that are off limits to Christian filmmakers, visual content creators?
Well, I don't think any part of the Bible is off limits. I mean, we could get into a 2CV discussion and like a second
Sure.
commandment violation, and
Yeah.
I'd probably lean more towards that in terms of being against images of Jesus than not. But I would say that even in that area, uh, in those areas where it's like, well, I can't portray uh, visually everything with the Song of Solomon. I think it can be portrayed in a way that you get the point and don't cause people to sin in making it and in watching it, right? So those are the two things that what I see that when I see things like that, people ask, well, what about Ezekiel 23:20 as a film or something like that? To me, that's a creative challenge in the same way like Ben-Hur was pretty open about the crucifixion, but they never showed who Jesus was in it. So it's
Right.
sort of like, how can you make how can you make a Passion of the Christ film and never do an image of Jesus? Well, you
Hmm.
just make it, you do a Passion of the Christ just on like the thief on the cross or something, right?
Right.
And so you never have to see Jesus, but you can be sort of around it and get sort of. So there's like, to me, that like those creative challenges are what will make a better story
Hmm.
because it forces people to think outside the box and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. Just a quick comment from Curtis Cutler, based on our conversation earlier. He says, "I wish we used wine for communion."
me
So,
too. But we use wine. I'm just saying for Curtis. I
yeah,
wish he
yeah.
had a wine for me.
My wife and I just started attending a church where they have the option of grape juice or wine, and we take the wine, and it feels like we're living on the edge a little bit
Yeah, I
because
remember. I remember Apologia Church. They came out of a drug rehab
right.
facility, so there was the longest time where they only had grape juice,
Hmm.
and then they decided, well, we need to have wine, so they had like two communion tables, one with wine, one with grape juice, and then the first Sunday, nobody went to the grape juice table, and so they just stopped having grape juice.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, that's part of the beautiful testimony is that, and proper alcohol addiction is rooted in the gospel. Should be, this is off topic, but it should be, you need to repent of your sin in such a way you can come to the table and enjoy wine rightfully, not because you struggle with sexual addiction, you should never be married.
Right. Right. Right.
Right. So it's like,
Yeah, good
no,
point.
you need to figure it out in a way that you can be redeemed and enjoy the blessings that God gave you rightfully. So
yeah, and getting back to what you said before, that redemption's not going to come from yourself and buying the Lifeway book. That's got to come from Christ.
Or an AA step.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Amen. All right. So we did get some clarification. Dr. Strange is going hard here in the comments. He says, remember we were trying to figure out if his comment was snarky or in good faith. Yeah, it was snarky. He says it was snarky.
Well, that's a good question. I'm sure other people have that same question anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Now we did Nick Smelker didn't like your allusion to Hobbit intercourse there. Didn't need that mental image. Nick, I'm with you. We're gonna have to screen our guests a little better here before they but listen, nobody wants to see that, and nobody wants to see nudity associated with Lord of the Rings, guys.
Nobody wants to see it.
That's exactly right. Brian Zebarth does ask, he says, will LOOR be digital only or on DVDs put in kiosks, sold in stores?
As of now, it's only digital.
Will I be able to watch it on my my Fire Stick, like the way I can watch
hope so.
Netflix?
Until they cancel us, right?
Well, I wanted to ask you about that as well, Marcus. How are you guys going to keep yourself from getting canceled? I mean, the layers of cancellation, you're peeling back some of those layers, making yourself more uncancelable. But do we just need to create our own Fire Stick? I mean, how do we get around all these things?
Yeah, all those options are on the table. But I think there's pretty significant ways in which it is possible to create your own technology without being limited to all the other infrastructures that's already been built. It is easier to use infrastructure that's already out there. It's in some ways cheaper, but in other ways it's actually more expensive to use the stuff that's already out there. So it's just a matter of just being long-term enough in your vision to know that this is where things are going. And so part of that is all the more reason, like the risk of being canceled from a technology infrastructure standpoint is all the more reason to do it because you have to build the companies now that can weather those storms. Right. Because if we don't do it, then once it gets worse than it is now, it's going to be even harder. Right. And so, but I look at this too, as we look at, like, let's say a potential Biden administration that's coming, and then we don't know what's going to come from that, especially in terms of giving more power to these technology companies. Right. But I look at that as saying, well, during World War II, Walt Disney shut down their studios and they just made government propaganda films, right? Mm-hmm. But then when World War II was over, Disney was positioned to be able to do whatever he wanted. And so when we look at, like, our nation and it's burning to the ground, when it's done burning, the land will still be there. And so if we look and see that if everything is going pretty terribly and we don't do anything and we just sit and wait, then once everything is over, we're not going to have anything to be the leaders of whatever that new culture is. Wow. So I just know that, like, if where I live, they were to succeed from the United States and be their own country, I would want to be in a position then that I could have a successful business right away. Yeah. Then instead of having to go, oh, finally it's over, and then build something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
this
is the time to build stuff when everything's falling apart around you. Yeah. Because I mean, this happens with Budweiser during Prohibition. They already had the factories and stuff in place, So they were able to manufacture and make money based off of what they had during the rough times. But
Hmm.
then once prohibition was lifted, they just turned on the switch and they were ready to go with their Budweiser and stuff. So
Yeah. Well, that's let me just give a quick shout out here to our Facebook and MeWe group, Christian Culture Builders, because that's a hub that we're trying to create for people who think the same way about building culture, and both as one of the New St. Andrews College ads talks about, either saving civilization or rebuilding it from the ashes. That's really that's kind of what that Facebook group is aimed around, and furthering the kingdom of Jesus Christ. We've got some more chatter in the comments on YouTube right now. People are getting into whether or not how orcs create babies and things like that. So worth looking at. Probably nothing worth putting on the screen right now.
yeah.
But I think Nate Werner did have a question. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, okay. I'll just put this up. This is just a fun one. We'll probably be done after this. But Nate Werner, watching on YouTube, he says he has a little suggestion for you. Make a Book of Revelation movie, full charismatic. And I think maybe by charismatic he might mean like dispensational, I'm assuming.
Okay.
Or maybe he does mean charismatic. I don't know what the charismatic interpretation is if it's not dispensational, but what
I want to see the 80-70 version of Revelation.
hey,
I want to see that movie made.
you mean like a partial preterist movie?
Yeah, like Rome taking over Jerusalem and then Rome being surrounded and all that stuff. Yeah.
I would totally love that.
Yeah.
And
so
you know what else?
the opportunities are endless.
Yeah. I mean, that would be kind of you know what, Marcus, you could make that movie, and that sounds like a total disaster movie, like a total sad movie. But then there could be something at the end, like in Apocalypto, Mel Gibson's movie, where the civilization is about to be destroyed, right? Because spoiler alert, at the end, the conquistadors are coming, and the Mayan or Aztec, or was it Inca civilization is about to be destroyed. You've got like this allusion to what's going to happen next. You could do the 70 AD version of Revelation, and at the end there could be some glimmer of, okay, but from the ashes of this, Christian civilization is going to rise, or the church is going to rise from this. You know what I mean? Like that, there's something there, I think.
That's a lot, man. I think there's so many. Every time there's a Bible story, it's only about Jesus. There's so many other options that have
Well, it's all
never
about
been
Jesus.
touched on. Yeah, well, yeah, right. You know what I mean. Like
I do.
specifically,
Yeah.
specific stories about Jesus, and so there's so many options that that's why it'll be good to have a platform that's open up, to let anybody make whatever they want.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Okay. One more question from Dr. Strange. Well, okay, you know what? This actually points up some theological considerations for you, Marcus, as someone who's going to be curating content and platforming content. He says this: does Marcus know that Gandalf and Sauron and others are demigods in the Tolkien world? How would you be okay with LOTR, Lord of the Rings, as a Christian?
What does he mean by demigods?
Well, someone pointed out, Nate Werner in the comments pointed out that they're not demigods. I think if I could interpret Dr. Strange here, remember he's writing from a Muslim perspective, and Muslims accuse Christians of worshiping the creation, not the creator. They don't believe Jesus is God, which he is, by the way, Dr. Strange. But they what do we think about stories that are ostensibly or arguably from the biblical worldview, but that portray things like magic or witchcraft or things like that, where we wouldn't.
It's like what Nate Wilson says. The very first wizard battle is between Moses and the Pharaoh's assistants, right?
Yeah. That's good.
So I think God gave us a magical world where regeneration happens every day. So I think I don't think it's wise to stray away from magic, because God has given us that's where all those sort of things come from, is from his stories and stuff like that. And then you have good magic and bad magic, and so you look at something like Harry Potter and say, well, there's obviously a clear distinction between good and evil, and then there's
Yeah.
sacrifice and all these sort of things.
Yeah.
And so I mean, even like Chronicles of Narnia, I mean, the amount of magic in there is incredible. And so I think, but I think that's the world God gave us. God gave us a magical world. He didn't give us a completely rational world.
Yeah.
In that sense, in a materialistic world. It's not completely materialistic. So
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I like how, I think it was Doug Wilson at one point who said, we tend to shy away from magic, but how do you explain when you're telling your kids the true story of Jesus turning water into wine or walking on water? And I'm using my own examples, but Doug Wilson points out, he goes, what is that? If that's not magic, what is that?
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. So
we call them miracles, but what's a miracle?
It's magic.
Right.
No, that's exactly what it is. And so I think that's the world God gave us. And I think knowing that we live in a world where there's magic, it makes for a better world.
Yeah. No, that's really good to think about. And I know I speak for many when I say I'm very much looking forward to LOOR coming out. Marcus, how can people, if they want to follow LOOR, they want to subscribe to updates, or generally follow your work, what would be a good next step for them?
Yeah, if you go to loor.tv, you can sign up for the email list there, and then you can sign up as an investor, or you can sign up as a potential subscriber. And so just pick one of the forms and sign up there, and then we'll be in touch.
Okay, great. All right, Marcus Pittman, thank you so much for joining me, man. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It was a real treat for me, and I know, based on the comments alone, I think we sparked a lot of there's evangelization going on right now in the comments. People are spreading the gospel to each other, encouraging each other to repent and trust in Jesus. So that's a good day. If we can foster that kind of conversation, that's a good day for me.
Yeah.
And man, brother, really looking forward to LOOR coming out. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll talk to you again soon, I hope.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me for the Think Institute podcast. If you're new to the Think Institute, my name is Joel Sedekase, and I'm the proprietor around these parts. I would encourage you, if you have questions that were not answered on today's episode, go ahead and shoot me an email. You can go to send your email, your inquiry to thethink.institute@gmail.com. You can check out all of our back catalog of episodes by going to thethink.institute/podcast. We've got now over like 180 episodes of the Think Institute, and the Think Institute and the Think Institute podcast continue to grow. So we're very grateful for your participation. And look, if you like what you hear, please go ahead and leave us an honest 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. I don't know how all the algorithms work, but I know that helps us get the word out about the Think Institute podcast and introduce more believers and non-believers to our content. Our mission is to equip, encourage, and engage. We want to equip believers to explain, share, and defend the Christian message. That's what we're all about. We want to help you grab your piece of the Great Commission. So check us out online. Shoot me an email if you feel so inclined. And yet again, remember, today is Giving Tuesday. So we're looking for like-minded individuals and churches to partner with us prayerfully and financially. And again, you can do that by going to give.cru.org at /101-8841. All right. Well, I certainly hope that you heard something helpful. I know I did. And this is not goodbye. This has just been a little pit stop along the way of your spiritual journey. So until next time, I hope it made you think.